Every time my sister prevailed, my father would replace a piece of me with machinery, claiming he wanted me to be her equal. But she won. Again, and again, and again, never once refraining. So after I murder my sister, I will bow worship with every conceivable instrument of death. I will hunt my father like a dog, and I will tear him apart slowly, piece by piece, until he knows some semblance of the profound and unceasing pain I know every single day.
I've talked a lot about trauma for these character essays, its relationship with memory, its effect on narratives, but this time I want to focus on communication. Because identity is by nature a transaction sustained by at least two, and Nebula's journey is based on this need for connection. Her whole journey is deeply linked to not only Gamora's journey, but her whole sense of logic in life is dependent on her. But what sets Nebula free isn't just this relationship, but with her relationship with herself, concentrated on entangling love, hatred, and denial. Therefore, the key concepts that this essay will be grounded by are identity, trauma, and communication. And in order to organize this analysis, yes, I am once again utilizing Joseph Campbell's MONOMYTH structure, because a core aspect of the hero's journey is the value of change, and Nebula's arc is focused on redemption. So this will allow me to focus on how one key concept develops the other. So I'll try and keep this interesting, guys.
You stupid traitor. Rory, careful on re-entry. There's an idiot in the landing zone.
Going back to the first Guardians of the Galaxy after Infinity War, an extra layer of ideas become present because Thanos contextualizes the actions of Gamora and Nebula with a bit more weight now.
You alienated my favorite daughter, Gamora.
Because trauma is presented as something that is inherited. Thanos loves his daughters because as much as he tortures Nebula and replaced her body parts with robotic pieces, it came from a sincere place of bettering her. Which is why after the interrogation, Nebula is put back together, and when she says,
"You should have killed me,"
It would have been a waste of parts!
Thanos actually sees Nebula as more than scraps. His sick little way of improving her life was to exert pain onto her in hopes that it would make her more emotionally resilient than he was when he suffered his trauma.
I know.
But to survive trauma, it requires a level of reinvention in one's identity, because otherwise that painful past can't ever be assimilated in your sense of continuity. Therefore, the fact that Thanos never did, and instead orientated his entire life backwards to try responding to this traumatic event, this has made him a crap father, and the life of Nebula and Gamora is about the consequences of this. Because pain, anger, hubris from his sense of impotence is socialized very specifically into Nebula's life.
Daughter.
Yes, Father.
Once this connection is made, Nebula's character shines a bit more because the trauma itself isn't an event, it's a relationship. The memories of being a sister and a daughter is actively obstructing her ability to become the author of her own life. So subsequently, something as simple as her introduction is given more weight because Nebula is literally at the corner of the frame in the shadows. And in this one image, not only are you introduced to a supporting character whose function is being a henchwoman to someone else, but also the theme of her being someone who sees herself as a periphery being, where the center of her life is nothing but Gamora and Thanos.
I'm a daughter of Thanos, just like you.
But I know Xandar.
Time never passes for Nebula because that's one of the consequences of trauma. The inability to contextualize a painful past fundamentally obstructs your ability to envision a future. As a result, it makes sense that one of Nebula's key actions in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 is her refusing to take the hand of Gamora.
You know he's crazy!
I know you're both crazy.
Campbell defined this as the refusal of the call, where the hero rejects change due to a sense of insecurity, fear, obligation, and inadequacy. The future is regarded not in terms of unremitting series of deaths and rebirths, but as though one's present system of ideals, virtues, goals, and advantages were to be fixed and made secure. Taking Gamora's hand would not only require Nebula to admit her fault, but to forgive her. And that requires Nebula to kill her old self. And she's unwilling to do that. Not yet, anyways. Nebula's character begins to properly blossom, entering into Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 because now it's able to deconstruct her. Who is this ball of rage if you take away what's aiming her and let her aim herself?
It's not ripe.
There's two moments that really present Nebula at her most characteristically naked. There's the moment where she refuses to kill Gamora when she has the chance.
I win, I bested you in combat.
No, I saved your life.
Well, you were stupid enough to let me live.
You let me live.
I don't need you always trying to beat me.
I'm not the one that just flew across the universe just because I wanted to win.
Do not tell me what I want.
I don't need to tell you what you want. It's obvious.
All throughout the story, Gamora looks out for Nebula, seemingly unconsciously, while Nebula knowingly pushes the boundaries with her. It shows that there's an inherent miscommunication between them. Gamora sees the parameters of their relationship quite sturdily, while Nebula sees it with a sense of emotional fragility. But this moment is when communication finally begins with the two.
You were the one who wanted to win, and I just wanted a sister!
The impulse to give up her revenge is Nebula discovering another perspective in life, a new horizon. Campbell called this the crossing of the first threshold, which ordinarily happens in Act 1, but for Nebula it happens in her second act. This stage is defined by the hero taking the steps into the unknown. And the unknown for Nebula is very simply putting her feelings into language.
I need to get off this planet.
Nebula finds no power in physical expression, but by putting everything into words, she discovers emotional powers, a sense of clarity. This breaks Gamora's heart, and together they get to heal. Nebula allows Gamora to hug her, and this is her finally having a glimpse that she could possibly let go. And not to sound too poetic, she achieves some wisdom through reconciling the existence of opposites, which is what Campbell defined as the apotheosis, where once we have broken free of the prejudice of our own provincially limited ecclesiastical, tribal, or national rendition of the world archetypes, it becomes possible to understand that the supreme initiation is not that of the local motherly fathers.
There are little girls like you across the universe who are in danger. You can stay with us and help them.
This is a moment where half of the old Nebula dies. Some of her trauma is reconciled because the identity she inherited as a sister has now been successfully reinvented. She knows Gamora loves her, and this new emotional context gives a different meaning to her past. But the father is still around, and that lack of resolution with Thanos hasn't made her recovery convincing enough for her to completely change. So she ultimately gives in to her temptations. So moving into Infinity War and Endgame, immediately our introduction of Nebula as her failing her revenge and being captured. This is called the crossing of the return threshold, where the hero returned home has troubled holding on to their wisdom, or as Campbell poetically described, how represent on a two-dimensional surface a three-dimensional form. Nebula cannot connect her new self with her old self-image, so she ends up repeating her old mistakes. But this time the consequences are a lot worse than just getting a body part removed. Nebula's unwillingness to let go of her revenge causes Gamora to tell Thanos where the Soul Stone is, and is what leads to her death. And this trade-off is the moment where Nebula finally accepts who she is, because the logic that built her entire identity in the form of vengeance and hatred is being evaporated.
He took her to Vormir. He came back with the Soul Stone. And she did it.
She never truly knew that there was another way until she lost it. Her sister reflected back to her hope, and by accepting it, finally, She has the power to grip her new-founded wisdom and become a new person. And this change is accentuated in Endgame. We open with her and Tony playing a game, and she's surprised not only by winning, but the cooperative nature of Tony. It's a fun little way to show that this is a new Nebula who doesn't just see dead ends, but is open to new opportunities. In shaking hands with a stranger, building new relationships, and even learning new rules.
You don't need to do that, because you're just holding the position.
This is someone who's overcome her trauma because the relationship that defined her past has been given new meaning in the present. Her sister didn't hate her, she loved her. And her father, in his own narrow, weird way, loved her too. Subsequently, this is spotlighted when Nebula finally gets what she wanted this whole time, revenge on Thanos. But like father, like daughter, it costed everything. Because it wasn't worth it, nor does it even feel relevant to what she wants anymore. She defends her father's convictions.
To tear this place apart, he has to be lying.
My father is many things. A liar is not one of them.
Thank you, daughter.
Something that you would never see Nebula do several films ago.
You kill him, I will help you destroy 1,000 planets.
And when Thanos dies, she stares into his eyes as his head lays there. She feels nothing, no satisfaction, no catharsis, no change, only the stillness from seeing her life finally coming to focus. But it was all too late. Nebula is the master of two worlds now. She's not angry at the past nor anticipating the future. She lives in the present with a sense of peace.
Careful on re-entry. There's an idiot in the landing zone.
As Emily Kitely and Michael Pickering said, the concept of trauma cannot be applied to all problematic or painful experience. It is only where the past is inaccessible, unassimilable, and unavailable for the task of making sense of experience. And this is subsequently where the time travel comes in, because she literally has access to the past, and her whole life ends up making sense as a result. Nebula now encounters Nebula, which is a very literal version of Campbell's stage The Magic of the Flight, which is when the protagonist has to face characters that are jealous and resentful of the hero's achievement. The original Nebula is like a fixed point in time, unmoving due to the pressure that has shaped her from her trauma, while the new Nebula is an adaptive person willing to give and accept chances.
I wasn't always like this.
Me either. But we work with what we got, right?
So it's ironic and fitting that the familiar person of who she was traps her, and it's by opening up to Gamora earlier that frees her. This whole scene is effectively a celebration of Nebula's arc. It's her entire journey encapsulated in this one exchange.
We become friends. We become sisters.
Nebula's whole life has been about what her inherited relationships reflected back to her, and also what she projected into it. If she shared hatred, then that's all she got. If she shared love, that's also what she got. For the first time, she repeats a lesson, not a mistake.
You can change. He won't let me.
Nebula kills herself to save Gamora, which is her own personal little miracle. She corrects her mistake in the form of Gamora's life and her own self-image. Not only has Nebula reinvented her identity after a trauma, but she has power over it now. And in the end, Nebula is there at Tony's funeral, and she hangs out with the Guardians as she looks off to a future in search for Gamora. This is a wonderful little ending for the character, at least for now, because she self-actualizes. She may still be a periphery character, but it's not in service to a powerless emotional force at the center of her life. It's from a feeling of respect and curiosity. And that in itself is deeply valuable. Nebula explores the limits of redemption and the power that comes from communication. in the form of hatred, in the form of acceptance, and in the form of harmony. All of these different heartbeats is what makes the characters so fun. Nebula is a hidden gem of a character, someone who very clearly had a very simple purpose originally, but she blossoms and grew extremely organically to the point that she's one of the first characters we see in Endgame. She shows us that expressing what hasn't been expressed is deeply important for our sense of development, if that makes any sense.